Hey guys, it's Chris from DSX Machina, and we're looking at our newest publication, which was supposed to come out a week ago, and there's a bit of a funny story on that. So I had already recorded a video that was going through this book and the corresponding game book, and as I was editing the video, I realized this needs more content, and I'll go into details of what I ended up doing, but I ended up having to throw out a good chunk of what I spent the previous weekend working on and rebuilding the game book to add some more stuff. So I'm recording this video again, and we're hoping on getting the dual release this week, a week late, and I do apologize for that. For those people who are a little curious, this is Threshold. It is a dual release. It is a narrative art book and an RPG. The art book is what we're looking at now, and this has been heavily inspired by a lot of the narrative art books that I grew up with. Some people may not know what those are, and some people have been calling them comic books. And I guess you call them a graphic novel. There's some aspect of that which is accurate, but there's no talking bubbles. It doesn't look like a comic book. There was one comic book called Aliens Tribes, which was pretty similar, where it was just a full-on novella. And there were wonderful illustrations on the right-hand side, and then the story was on the left-hand side. And it's a fantastic book. And I guess you can call it a graphic novel. Technically, that wouldn't be inaccurate. Another example of these would be Tales from the Loop and The Electric State. Both of those are narrative art books. They tell stories. Sometimes it's not a cohesive narrative. Sometimes it's a broken story. And most of the time, it's the artist telling the story. Sometimes it's several artists, and somebody has written a setting around it. A good example of that would be the Terran Trade Authority handbooks, which I've talked about on this channel a couple times, that were a huge inspiration in my youth. And later, recently even, I've gone and made the effort to complete the entire collection. I've only had 2 books in that series, and I've read a few of the others, but now I actually own all of them. So Nick Greenwood and I, Nick's the artist who does the work for about 99% of all my productions, I've been talking to him about doing our own narrative art books, and we have a couple ideas that we've been dancing around. Threshold is not one of the ideas that we've danced around. Threshold has actually been around since 2010. It was a production that I wanted to do as a standalone offshoot from the Amethyst work I was doing with Goodman Games. And if you really pay attention, if you really go back to the Wayback Machine, you'll see a mention of Threshold being talked about on N-World back in 2010. So it's taken a very, very long time to bring this project to fruition. But I hit the idea of splitting the story and setting into its own narrative art book and putting the rules into another book. And if this works, I want to be able to do this with a trilogy of ideas I have called the Ruined Rose series. It would be wonderful if you do. Those would most likely have to go on Kickstarter because those require a lot of new original artwork. Where Threshold, we were able to recycle some of the previous illustrations, as well as some new ones that Nick has created for us, which we'll be seeing here. So we're going to go through these 2 books. We're going to go through the narrative art book, which we're looking at now, and then the RPG. It is a 5e supplement because that's what I've been working on. Some people have been asking whether or not we'll release other ones. And I've always had an open invitation. If someone wants to adapt one of my books for a system, we can talk about it. We can work off of the work on a format where we publish the adaptation. You can receive some compensation for it, but I'm always open for adaptations of my books for systems that I don't cover. I'm never against it. We have the opening that just has our names. And we'll see that the black format was a decision based off of a lot of the art books I've seen. They either use all white or all black. I thought the all black really fit. And this book is a compilation of documents, emails, recovered audio files, transcripts from audio logs. That's all set in the past tense, collected by an alien. So this I'm not really ruining. This is like basically the first format. We even have it right here. Terran Reclamation Authority compiled by Tempo QX349 ULEX on this date, DC-239 FP15 PB8598. This is like an alien registration. The TRA is an alien organization that's attempting to recover documents of the failed Terran Empire. Humans are extinct at this setting, seemingly apparently extinct, and they're trying to piece together what happened to them over several thousand years of galactic expansion. So it's a bit of a cosmic horror, but it's basically trying, and it's assembled in a semi-linear order. A few of these initial bits are not, but after we get into the primary crux of the story, as a result, there's no cohesive narrative. It's not telling one story per se. It's characters move in and out. The story encompasses over 3,000 years of human expansion. We have a quick timeline that only talks about the first few decades that leading up to a certain event, but this goes and takes over thousands and thousands of years. And then every illustration generally is referenced as well. And the rule basically is that if it's out of any box, then it's an entry from the author of this book, Tempo QX349 Ulex. If it's a red box, then it's another alien making another report that Tempo was acquired. If it's a white background, it's generally a digital article of some variety. Sometimes they are in these backdrops, which are like digital screens, which are recovered data drives and so forth. Sometimes you'll see this, which indicates that this is actually a video on file. This is kind of implying to the aliens that they could actually see this video. Obviously, the video doesn't exist, but this kind of tells you that this is a transcript of a video they can access. It's important to note that there's a disclaimer that says this book has been translated into the human language. This is our way of trying to justify why this is in English, by saying that if you find this translation difficult to read, please refer to a native text edition. So that's kind of a justification of why it's all in English. And so as you go through it, it's just a series of accounts, logs. Some are kind of like internet, TikTok style videos. Some are actually recovered documents. Some we have like registration information. We've got audio files. When there's an image here, there's just an audio excerpt. Once again, these excerpts don't really exist. It would be awesome if I could do an ARG where I do have all these video clips made and all these audios recorded. We have a fictional wiki article here. Here's another one that we have a registration document, another document, this recovered handwritten personal journal, this pie graph, and we have a bunch of new illustrations. We've been seeing a few of them. This is another new illustration from Nick. Probably one of his best cityscapes he's ever done. Yes, I think the Neurospasta one has got the most gravity to it. It's got a lot of detail, but this is beautifully atmospheric. I just love the way this one looks. And basically every spaceship that we've ever had, Nick's ever drawn, shows up in this one. A few other things. And once again, another wonderful. Originally, this illustration had a much larger person. The person was like this big, and I just told him the more you shrink the person, then the larger the scene becomes. So this originally was like the person was way larger, which is interesting too, because this looks like a doorway now. But this is hopefully the desire is that as you read this, you're picking up the setting without it being just spoon-fed as just one long story. For those people who read a lot of my other stuff, like Affinity and Amethyst, I generally plant a lot of in-universe elements. If I feel that something is better told as a first-person perspective, I'll switch the narrative and make it appear like it's an excerpt from some file. With Affinity, we did that with actually taped documents, which are like either through wax or through Scotch tape, taped to the inside of the book. It's not really; it's an illusion. It's actually printed on the paper, but it looks like it's taped. And we did that same thing with some of the later Amethyst books. But all the Amethyst books have done that, but never done it to the kind of the meta way we did it with Affinity. So what this book is just, it takes the game out of it and just does the excerpts, which was a really fun thing to do. And it was actually pretty fast. It took me about 2 or 3 months to write all these out and compile them. And we have a lot of illustrations. This book is actually not that book. This is 91 pages, which is the art book. But remember, this is 91 pages of just story and segments and fluff and illustrations, which I thought came off really, really nice. And once again, the fonts change, the documents change, and it was trying to give the impression that this is a compilation of all of these documents. We're already sitting at, the year 3000. We're about halfway through the book. I'm not going to go through all of it because I don't want to ruin the story here. If I was a better in graphic design, I would throw a lot more kind of the like fake documents, the same way I did with Affinity, but I didn't want to go too crazy. And once again, more of these videos on file. And then once again, characters move in and out of the story. These characters here, Telford, Corso, Balkan, they pop in constantly throughout the story. And then it has what I feel is a very interesting conclusion. That's a bit of a twist at the end of the story. You'll also notice that this is not in a 8x10 format. This is in a 10x10 format, which means that this currently is not going to be available as a print on demand because there's no 10x10 option on Drive-Thru-RPG, but I feel really passionate about having this as a 10x10 format. I really wanted it to be this way. If people really want this as a printed book, then we will look at a limited run production run of the art book. Right, and that'll be cool. I think that I would love to see this as an actual art book. So here we have the RPG game book. We see this is 5th edition, and as I said, I am always open for people adapting it to other systems. They can reach out to me, and we can work on adapting it to a system that you like, as long as it's a popular one. And we can see about publishing it. With Threshold, I want to keep them all under one SKU, so that if you purchase Threshold, you get all the systems compared to the other products I've released where they're under different SKUs. Obviously, this is the cover of the art book, and this is the cover for the 5e RPG. This logo I'm pretty proud of. This has got a bunch of elements. Usually when I do a logo myself, it's just I use the font, a cool font, and leave it at that. If you see something cool like the Amethyst or Ultramodern logos, those are done by Nick. This was the first time where I've been playing around with graphic design. Both the art book and this one have been a lot more effort on my part trying to create interesting graphic design and actually doing some basic illustrations with Photoshop, playing around with some illustrations and using pre-existing illustrations that I have access to, and then playing around with Photoshop in order to create something that's original. And there's a few examples where I've done that either with the graphical elements in the art book or in this RPG. But this is one of my examples. This is a very cool looking, I think a really cool looking kind of logo with a space on the logo with the flash and all that. Very much inspired by the movie Outland. Here's our contents and index, our chapter, our 2-page chapter spread. Our first one here is just the replay of the cover, but you get to see the whole image this time. That was something also I did recently, is make the chapter start a 2-page spread. And then we get into what's a very common thing, which I kind of go into some of the some of the new rules. We have the crafting system from Conestoga in here, I might have mentioned. And then we get into the setting, incorporations and designations. Here's just chapter 2, which is called Concept. I should actually put the numbers on them. I'll do that before release. And this kind of goes into the setting. This spells out in more detail the setting. And that's why I have the spoiler warning for players, because it puts out a lot more detail. The art book is a great way of kind of showing the setting, describing the setting and the world without giving too many spoilers and answers. So this book will give you a lot more answers. So if you're wanting the setting to be a bit more ambient and not so direct, then the art book will tell you what you need to know. But this book, the RPG, will tell you all the answers you need to know about the setting. Threshold is not entirely original. It is heavily inspired by a lot of products, a lot of other properties. These are all things that I've been a fan of. Even the ones I fully admit are completely junk. And some of them are very old. Some of them are very, very old. And some of them are not. And some you may recognize, Enemy Mine and Dead Space games and so forth. Alien and all the games and products and movies that have ripped off Alien, which is probably half the movies on this list. We have new races. We have the Aeon, which no, these are not, when I say races, they're not. These are just variations of human beings that have adapted to space travel. And a few others. Like the Aeon, for example, is someone who's adapted to space flight. The mechs are androids, or a new variation of android. The Outlander, who's adapted to hostile planetary environments. And obviously the human, which is not listed here, because you can just get human off of any 5e book. We have a couple new backgrounds. We use the same background mechanics that we did for Amethyst, and also to a lesser extent Affinity and Ultramodern 5. And these are still 100% compatible to 2024 rules, with the new aspect being that background selection gives you your ability score bonuses, where in the original game it was your quote-unquote race selection. And with Amethyst, I introduced a new variation where you could choose where to get them. So there are hereditary abilities with your species, or trained abilities with your background. And that gives you usually a language or a skill proficiency and ability score increase. So if you pick the hereditary abilities, you do not get the trained abilities. If you get trained abilities, you don't pick up hereditary abilities. And that's why we're able to appease both the new philosophy of D&D and the classic ability of D&D, and gives people more variety. You can pick the old school with the original selection, or do it with background. So it's still compatible with the 2024 version of D&D and the classic version of D&D. These 8 career paths, although this is not something you see in D&D 2024, it's still something I like playing off of. I like having these kind of historical marks, kind of these hooks to get you into your character. There's a bunch here. We have a bunch of new languages, and there's some new feats based off of the new species we've added in. Next chapter is tech. This is a big chapter. This is the chapter I basically gutted and rewrote over the last week, and incorporating the crafting rules from the Affinity Conestoga setting. The reason why I did that was because the crafting system in Conestoga was heavily inspired from Dead Space, and since Threshold is heavily inspired from Dead Space, it was seemingly stupid not to include it. So if you have Conestoga, then you will see this system here. It's basically almost verbatim copied over. Obviously, we don't mention the makers or the Conestoga itself. We've pulled those references out. But everything else there. We don't have big mecha, though. I really couldn't justify having mecha, like powered mecha, big, huge, large mecha in this story. It just didn't fit with the setting, so they're not here. But the cages and other basic crutches are here. So we have crafting machines, so you can craft. So now components are all these. Every item is listed with a component, and that tells you how many widgets and any other devices you may need to construct these items. Everything is listed for that, which is the reason why gear isn't just listed like this. It's listed like this, which tells you the build time and the components. This game is very much engineering focused. There is a section for uncraftable gear, and then these are the crafting components. Once we get past that, we have a lot here. We get into, eventually, weapons. And obviously the artwork here has been modified and pulled from Conestoga. But the idea that you buy these frames, and these frames allow you to add in different components and build effectively thousands of different guns. So these are all the one-handed frames, two-handed, and heavy frames. And then here are the drivers, and then you get indexes. And when you combine a driver to an index, you get an expression. Here are all the expressions. And so based off of the type of frame you've built with the driver and the index will create a completely different combination. So a one-handed light frame with a blade driver and a compressor index will create a completely different combination if you went two-handed with a flechette with the same index. So these are all the expressions. There's a lot here, everything from fire extinguishers and flashlights and chainsaws to ice launchers, rocket launchers, floating saw blades, basically just dozens of different variations. And I explained the variations here. The ranges are based off if it's a one-handed, two-handed, or heavy weapon. And that's still not even all of it. So we go through all of these expressions here, and there's a bunch of them. And the rarity of each item is also a factor as it adjusts the bonus. Oh, that's not supposed to be there. Get that out. I'm catching little mistakes, which I'll fix. Like we saw one over here where this is like an actual white line. Got one here as well, so I can fix that. I'll always pick up little mistakes until the release. Then you can modify your weapons further with processors. These are a bunch of chips you can add in that'll increase the range, increase the crit ratio, increase the reload speed, and what have you. There's a bunch of stuff you can do. And there's some processors and then even more upgrades. So processors or modifiers to the weapon, and upgrades are just the new additions, like literally adding like ice damage to a weapon, adding a power booster, or what have you. We have a bunch of pre-made, like pre-designed super heavy weapons here as well, which can be crafted. Everything has crafting rules here. After that are the explosive section, which is basically carried over from Ultramodern 5. A few things have been added in. The seismic survey charge, for example, was added, and a few other weapons have been removed. Armor, we have a bunch of spacesuits and so forth. I brought over the endoslaves from Conestoga, just because it kind of works within the setting. And then here are the basic exoskeletons you can pick up, light, medium, heavy. And here are all the upgrades you can get. Yeah, that's it. 4 pages full of upgrades, 4 and a bit actually. And then this goes through all the upgrades you can get. And then we have a listing of just general armor, which Conestoga doesn't have. And in that, we've added a bunch of new spacesuits. So we've added a bunch of spacesuits in here as well. And I had to throw in the ped loader, kind of the Aliens-inspired ped loader. Sunsuit, which is inspired from the movie Sunshine. Then we go into the space section. These are rules in having how space travel works. There's a bunch of stuff that's carried over from the Threshold chapter in Ultramodern 5. With a bunch of new rules, namely like cryosleep, the void sheen, drift shock is all stuff that's new. Core power rules, the rules are carried over as well. Then we have starship and space combat, ship modifications, and then we have all the mules. We've presented them a little differently so they're a bit easier to read, and we have a couple of illustrations that we get to throw in from so forth. Our salvage section, which is basically just all the other ships. So we have a bunch of ships here, and I try to throw in every illustration. Every spaceship we've ever drawn pops up here. So Cutlass Farsight, Galactic Starliner, Hammerhead. So these are some of these illustrations are carried over. These are from Amethyst, for example. So there's a lot more ships here that were in than were in Threshold's chapter in Ultramodern 5. And then you get to design your own layout. We have so you can basically build your own kind of ship plans if you want to make like a ship dungeon, basically. And so these are all. There's a lot here, and so once again, you can go to Deus Ex Machina's website, go to our download direct Google Drive, and you can download all these on high res. That's why they're not like huge stuff here. Plus, if you buy it, there's going to be a zip file that's going to have them all anyway. And then we have a campaign here. There's some illustrations there. And then planets. And we saw this image before. And now this is our planetary listing. These planets I actually designed. I didn't assign which planet these were because I didn't want to say, well, that's Stasco and this is Grove. I just figured I'd put these planets there and let you guys figure out, like, you know what, this is Lalanda, and maybe this is Esk, and then let you figure it out. Then we have Mercabo Worlds. There's a lot of planets here. And then we move into the monster section. These are some adversaries that have been carried over from Ultramodern. After that, we have the Antecedents. They've had their lore changed so they can actually fit within the Threshold setting. Previously, they weren't part of the setting. Canonically, only the Outsiders, which were called the Evolution in Ultramodern 5, they are the only creature that is canon within the art book. But I threw in a bunch of other monsters so that the GMs can custom design their own games. Antecedents are one of them. So we have them here. Blights were a brand new addition. Like I say, they're technically not canonical within the official Threshold setting. They're being offered as an alternative additional thread heavily inspired by my favorite settings and games. Well, and although the Blights may not appear obvious where they're from, once you get into the monsters, and there's actually quite a few we threw in. There's actually quite a few. There's like quite a few. You'll know very quickly which IP I'm taking inspiration from. The Chitin, which are from Ultramodern, they're actually in here now. We actually have some monsters, which we never had before. Same thing with the Kono. Got some monsters for those. The Outsiders, which were called the Evolution, they are here. The lore has been tweaked to fit this setting now. Then Xenobites, which are another optional, non-canonical monster threat. And then we have the index and then the final page. So that is 235 pages, I'm sorry. And when you combine that with the art book, that's almost 400 pages worth of content. That's getting released this week. But yeah, so there you go. So this is the RPG, and then I just showed you the art book, and that is coming out this week. I hope you guys will enjoy it. Anyway, that was our quick little flip through from this book, and this has been Chris from Deus Ex Machina.